cloud. Let me do that.
Should.
Okay. I am now recording.
Yeah, preferably to the cloud. That's
Yeah.
what we're doing.
Right. I was like, it's not going to save to my desktop. We don't have room for that here.
No.
So, all right. So, does this seem ridiculous to you yet? So normally, if I did this face-to-face, I mean, people doing interpretive dance, I expected that some people would be like, this is ridiculous. I'm done. I'm leaving the workshop. But the point of that exercise and that breakout was to elicit, how do you feel when you're only allowed to communicate what you know in a way that was difficult for you to effectively communicate what you know? And so the reason I ask that is because we often choose assessment types that make it difficult for our students to show us what they know, but we choose them because we think they're an effective way of evaluating them. So what can we do about this issue, and how do we use a Moodle to make that happen? Hang on, let me go over to presenter mode. There we are. All right, so when we talk about Moodle quiz, which was really the title of this session, although the air of the session was that we would talk about Moodle quiz and talk about other things as well, but we're still going to really get into some of quiz. And so quiz is a very powerful tool. There are so many different question types, probably more than most people realize. I would say upwards of 10 to 15 different question types. And with each iteration of Moodle, each new version of Moodle, it seems like they're adding more. There are question bank options. We'll get a little into question banks, but Melanie is going to be offering a full session on question banks this week, and I really encourage people to go to that to learn about question banks. One of the things that I do really like about Moodle quiz is that there's so many different ways to give feedback. You can give feedback on an individual distractor, on the question while the student is still taking the test, at the end on each question, and an overall feedback for the quiz. And so those feedback options are really, really helpful, because if you've given an assessment, you don't want the learning to stop there. Feedback can make sure it keeps going. Moodle quiz offers some pretty easy access for students. They get into your Moodle class, they can take the quiz right there. And then you can also use the Safe Exam Browser, which has been a plugin in versions 3.7 and 3.8, but is now fully integrated in 3.9 and can be set up on the back in the admin area, that your administrator has to do all the legwork to get it set up. But once it's there, there's lots of really cool things that you can do with Safe Exam Browser. For instance, maybe you want there to be, I'm just laughing at Adam's stuff that comes in the chat. Maybe you want to allow students to use a dictionary, or you want to be able to have Zoom run while you're video monitoring your students, but you want the Safe Exam Browser to lock them down so they can't navigate on that computer. Safe Exam Browser is a really effective way to lock down what's going on the student's computer, but also to really control what you will allow. And so that is integrated now in 3.9, fully integrated instead of a plugin. So as I talked about, there are tons of different question types in Moodle quiz. And remember that Moodle quiz is not just a quiz. You can make them as long as you want, so then it's really more of a test. It's just called quiz. So you have calculated, simple calculated. There are different types of drag and drop questions, which are becoming increasingly popular, those alternate style format questions. Calculated multi-choice, you could do a description, an essay, matching. Closed questions are something you may be hearing more and more about, where the answers are embedded within the question. These are very popular in situations where perhaps you're giving the learner a scenario, and Adam talked about this a little bit. You can create a question, like a scenario, and the closed question kind of unfolds as it goes. You can have multiple things happening in the question. And those are becoming increasingly popular on certification exams, where the licensing board wants someone to be able to look at something and pick out all of the things that are wrong and then what to do with them. And so it becomes a bit of an unfolding case scenario as you go. If you check out the chat, Dan has just posted an article about a type of assessment that's used in their OER course that they built for high school chemistry using calculated questions. And I will also mention that in this presentation, I really only stuck to things available in core. There are lots of different plugins that can be used for quiz. I won't go into them because I always try to give people what's in core, because you may not, especially right now, people don't have the budgets to bring anything new in. They don't have the budget to purchase different things. Scott, it's 3.9 has it built right in. You can download it as a plugin for 3.7 and 3.8. You're welcome. All right, so you can just see there's tons. Multiple choice, which is our standard question type, is an option in here. There's a random short answer matching, which I actually had not recognized before was in there. So I want to look more into that. I don't know a lot about that one. I do know, select the missing words is a great one. Numerical and text. And Gavin has just mentioned that Stack is a nice free plugin for quiz. So if you wanted a computer-aided assessment package for mathematics, Stack is what you're looking for. Thank you, Gavin. And I know math and chemistry are often the two places that feel very, feel the growing pains sometimes in Moodle Quiz and need a little more than what's in the core feature. Gavin's also put a link out to the plugin page for that. And Scott's kind of explained that random short answer matching converts multiple short answer questions into a single matching question. So pretty cool. And so great for key terms, yeah. And I think that as you look at this, you realize that Moodle Quiz is adaptable for any environment that you are facilitating or teaching in. So whether that's K-12, whether that's corporate higher ed, whatever the case may be. All right. And as I mentioned, I love quiz feedback. I love feedback in general. It's a big thing that I promote and I get a little evangelical about sometimes. But so the quiz offers lots of feedback options. You have deferred feedback where the student has to enter an answer to each question and then submit the whole quiz before anything's graded and they get any feedback, which if you're doing a one shot and it's really an evaluative type thing and you don't want them getting feedback as they go through, it's the way to go. I think that's how probably most tests are given. There's immediate feedback, and with immediate feedback, hang on, I'm just gonna mute her. With immediate feedback, it's similar to interactive mode in that the student can submit their response immediately and then during the quiz attempt, and they can get it graded like as they're going. However, they can only submit one response and they cannot change it later. So still very evaluative in the sense that maybe they're getting feedback as they go, but they're not able to change the answers, which I think is important if that's what your goal is, right? You have deferred feedback or immediate feedback with certainty-based marking, which I think is really cool. With that, the student or learner doesn't just answer the question, they also indicate how sure they are that their answer is correct. And then the grading is adjusted based on by the choice of their certainty. So that students have to reflect honestly on their own ability and their own level of knowledge to get the best mark. So if I got it wrong and I said, I definitely know I got this wrong, or I got it right, but I'm not really sure why I got it right. It's, it kind of adjusts for that. So those are some of the different feedback types. I think that being able to provide very detailed feedback just to your learners is extremely helpful. Sometimes you might point them into where they would find the information that they should have reviewed. I am a big proponent of that because I really believe in self-effective learning. And so if I just tell you why it's right or wrong, that doesn't really help you. But if I point you to where you needed to go, perhaps you can understand why you missed that particular question. Any questions or comments on feedback?
I might speak up on this one. I put it in the chat as well. I've been doing feedback, and I found out we got thrown into full-time online summer school chemistry. So it was all a year's worth of chemistry to create within a span of 2 weeks to get ready for it. So it was great. But I found that a lot of the feedback mechanisms I had already built in. Mm-hmm. But in some of them, the default is always feedback off.
Yeah.
Is there a way that a person can change that? That to me doesn't seem intuitive. That the default that they should get feedback. Mm-hmm. I understand they might want to wait until after the window is closed and those other things. But is there a way to alter those? because I color code my feedback of like stop, like green means awesome, go outside and play. You're fine. And yellow is like, well, we got to touch on these couple things. There are worriers. It's like, don't focus on everything, just these. And then red means you need tutorial. You need to come in and so on. So,
we need to be,
yeah.
So can
So
you change that on the back end? So you can, I would imagine that there must be a site admin, and anyone who is like is a site admin, definitely speak up here. I would think that on the back end of things, you can change the default on quiz to do feedback. You, and in the instructor role, may not be able to do that, but if you're using course templates or something like that to build your courses, you might be able to do it from there. Does anybody have any experience or input on being able to change the defaults for feedback on quiz?
I do, admin, and I know you can change a lot. You can set a lot of the settings. I'd have to look.
Yeah.
If you give me a second, I will, in fact, look at the actual settings you can change, but I think you can. You should be able to.
Yeah, you can. It's called how questions behave.
Yeah.
Is that an admin or is that on the user end that I could control?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, right? Why would any institution ever want a teacher to be making a teaching decision? That's half a joke. Half a joke, by the way. Right? Admins make all the teaching decisions of a platform, or an institution does their general strategy. The fact is they don't make all those unless they've got good consultants in. But the admins are the only ones who have access to that kind of thing. But yeah.
Okay.
So I know that. Yep. I was deliberately being bold there.
So if you want to modify how questions behave for all courses, that's an admin thing. If you want to do it at just, the course level, yeah, you can change that. But I'm not sure you can. You could make a quiz. You could create the quiz without the questions, and if you're going to have several quizzes, you create a stock quiz and then you copy it several times with the settings you want.
Yeah,
but
I think you probably have a good case for your admin, because I can't imagine there's a lot of people who aren't leaving feedback. It should be the default, and you should have to turn it off if you don't want it, because that really pushes people to leave feedback. With that off, people are not going to do feedback. And again, then that means that the learning stops the second the quiz is given. And that's not what we want. We want them to continue to learn and, become experts in that area that we're quizzing them and testing them in.
Is that not one of the challenges you've got? Because you've got either summative, which is a high stakes, or you've got formative, and that's and you're going to have a default setting of one or the other, and unless you've got, and this is going back to what the person said beforehand, what you should do is create a template for yourself of a summative quiz and a formative quiz at the top of your course, and hide both of them. And when you want to create one, just duplicate it. So it's like creating your own templates.
Right.
Yeah. So
you can also import activities from one course to another. So if you have an activity that is the same as what you want in a different course, you can always reach out and grab it, pull it over. You got to be careful about how you created your questions, if you want the questions to come over or not. But
yeah, and if you have sharing cart, moving that to different courses, you can just pop it in the sharing cart and drop. So yeah.
This came when I had to mass produce a bunch all at once. And I didn't, because there are different question types and so on, like you were saying with create one type and copy those. I wasn't quite sure which direction they were going to go until we got into the question types. So yeah, it's what happens when you have to do things on the fly and lessons learned.
Yep. There's lots of growing pains, I think, for people as we're trying to put everything online.
That's not flying, that's falling with style.
Yeah, it was what it felt like anyway. All right. So the question bank, as I mentioned, I'm not going to get super in depth with. As you can hear, my dog Pearl is now having a fit. She hears me talking to all of you and I'm not talking to her. So I may take a quick break and let her go play outside. Yeah, but you can create your question banks at the site, the course, or the quiz level, which I think is important. I try to get people away from doing site-wide because that can become more difficult to manage. I think that courses should have their own question bank, but lots of people have lots of opinions on that. And I think that you're able to share them here. The role can be set up to allow teachers to share between courses. So like maybe I created a question bank in my chemistry course and Melanie wants to use it in her chemistry course. I can share that. As long as my role isn't able to do that, we can share those question banks, which I think is really helpful. And you can organize those questions by category. And I think Melanie has some to add. I'm going to let Pearl out and just mute myself if you guys want to share real quick.
Two things. I tend to strongly recommend people not use the activity level bank. And I'll say this on Friday when I present, because when you do that, if you happen to decide you want to use that quiz somewhere else and you import it, you lose your questions if you do that. And that's really frustrating. I used to work for an agency that every year courses were copied for the next school year. And they would create their questions in the quiz level bank. And when it got copied over, their quiz would be blank because the questions don't copy. So that's something to keep in mind. And you can also create questions at the category level. So if you have, say, a category that's all science courses, you could put all those chemistry questions in the category for science courses. And that would be another way to share. So there.
I would agree with you. I think the first step when you're managing a question bank is actually what I generally do is target all of, say, the learning outcomes or your skills or competencies, create your categories and subcategories for those. So you can put your questions into all of them, which means if you're going to have, for example, a formative quiz and you want to tackle 5 learning outcomes, you can randomly take from each of those subcategories. So getting that course level category structure is really important.
Very cool. All right. So when we talk about other assessment options, we've talked a lot about quiz, but there are a lot of other assessment options and ways to evaluate your students or learners in Moodle. Some of the ones that I'm going to look at here and that you all chose were choice, workshop, assignment, glossary, and the wiki. Now, they're not all necessarily graded as far as having a gradebook entry that links directly to the activity, but that doesn't mean that you can't use them for evaluation as long as you're providing students with a very clear explanation of how that information will be graded and what the expectations are. And we'll talk about that as we kind of look at each one.
I have a question
sure.
Related to this and to the previous slide. I was basically I inherited an anatomy course from a previous instructor, and they built this awesome question bank. Is there any easy way to be able to view the questions like on a single document? Or do I have to go through like that web of questions to see them?
You can export them, but I don't know that it's necessarily in an easy to read format. It's not particularly user friendly.
Yeah, I put them all onto one page in an empty quiz and preview the quiz and export it that way. Yeah, okay. That's the way I do it.
That's the easy way to do it. That's how we also do when we have to review an exam.
Yeah.
we do it.
I'm gonna write this down. So what do you do?
Create a blank quiz, and then just add all of your questions to it. And then when you preview it, just preview all questions on one page. And you can then print that to a PDF or do whatever you want. Or you have it's easier to review just on that page.
And
Hart has question pools.
Hart has posted a document in the chat that is for, are the instructions about how to do that are actually written right out in the document she just posted in chat. It's a PDF, so make sure that you grab that.
And if you're using question pools, and Scott kind of mentioned something about this too, if you can take all those questions that you've created and put them in that document and see. Of course, 500 questions is a lot. I thought I was hardcore with my 70. So,
well, big question banks. So, and I think, was it Melanie, you talked about lesson. And as I was making this, I was like late last night and I was like, I feel like I've forgotten something, and lesson was the thing I forgot. So we will actually talk about lesson. It won't be a slide in here though. But when I revise this, I'll make a slide for lesson when I redo this and redo the recording so that we have it. Just writing it down on a post-it. So choice, I really like the choice activity. It's not necessarily something that's evaluated by point, but it's something that's really more of a formative evaluation of students. You can stop mid-lecture. You can do a pre and post choice activity to kind of see where students are and whether they've changed their answers. It functions a little bit like a classroom response systems, very similar to maybe like questionnaire. Feedback is another option, which just gives you more where students can input information. And then WooClap is very similar, it just has lots of different question types. I like to use choice as a quick check of learning after lecture. I'll hit like my 5 key points that came out of my lesson because it helps students to close the door. So they've done the learning. I want them to kind of answer some questions on the 5 key points, which maybe clues them in a perfect world that those are probably things they should focus on. And I can also use it to gather information to direct my upcoming lessons, which I did for this. So I used WooClap and questionnaire and all these different things in the different sessions I'm going to be giving on Moodle. But I asked people, what is your level of comfort with Moodle? How would you rate your experience level? What do you really want out of this session? And so when people were very clear that like they didn't really want to know about like how to assess and when to assess and things like that, they weren't really looking at the fundamentals of assessment coming from this. They wanted to know what was in Moodle. I was able to completely redo the presentation, maybe not the best presentation, but I was able to redo it to gear the lesson toward what the learners needed. And so sometimes you can use that to help direct lecture. For instance, especially if you're doing maybe professional development or really any setting I can think of, things tend to get very siloed. You don't always know what was covered prior to the learner coming to you. You can use choice to evaluate where they are. So you're not spending a lot of time teaching something that maybe they already know and you don't need to cover. You can move that from, you know, doing something that was going to be really in-depth to just a brief cursory review and you're going to jump off. And Gavin indicated questionnaire is better. I'm a big fan of questionnaire as well. I really like all of them. I find choice is easy if I'm just looking for like a cut and dry, just need this or this. Questionnaire is great, especially if you're comparing over time. And Melanie pointed out the difference between feedback and questionnaires. Feedback is core and questionnaire is a plugin. Yes. But questionnaire does do branching questions better.
I suppose that would be better said conditional.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. If you're going to cover that.
Mm-hmm. And I like feedback for a lot of different things. I find that to be pretty useful. There was a time when like the ability to view the analysis was not as readily available, but since that is there, I think feedback is really useful for a lot of things. Course evaluations, you know, comparing where students are at the beginning versus the end of something. You can get a nice graphical display of things. Assignment is just a tried and true favorite of people. But often it's still just a written assignment. I want you to do this paper and submit it and do this and submit it. But you can do so much more with assignment. You might do written papers. Maybe you were going to do, maybe students were supposed to do a presentation. You've always done a presentation in class. Now they could record their presentation. If it's a short one, they could use the RTC recorder. If it's a long one, perhaps you ask them to record it, pop it up on their own YouTube or Vimeo channel, and submit the unlisted link to you, and you can review that actual presentation. Sometimes when we ask people to do presentations, the nerves are so high on a regular face-to-face presentation or doing it in a Zoom session like this that it's not an effective mechanism for evaluating what a student knows. But if you let them record it and spout it off to you, might work out better. Students can create pamphlets that could be creating a lesson that you want them to give, and they can be uploading that stuff through assignment. There's lots of ways to grade. You could use direct grading or feedback comments, which I have in there twice for some reason. One was feedback comments and the other was feedback file comments. Rubrics, which I'm a huge fan of. I do love rubrics. I love a well-crafted rubric where you can also leave lots of feedback. You can configure assignment in many ways that you're allowing them to submit maybe one file or multiple files. For instance, maybe I wanted to give my students And Ginny said her students prefer to record in PowerPoint. And I think that whatever works for your students, assignment is a great way to let them use the thing that they want to use and still get it to you and submit it to you. But also to bring in more than just a written assignment. I really think that it's important to do more than just a regular written paper. For instance, pamphlets, brochures, things like that. In nursing, one example might be patient education. So you can do all these different things. Mel, you know what a rubric is? Yes, I feel your pain. Not everybody knows what a rubric is or how to write one. So you can do lots of creative things with assignment. It's another way, like if you have, I know that in some of the COVID circles, we've talked about how do you evaluate students doing a hands-on skill that they would have done in a lab that they can no longer do on campus. This might be a way where they're recording themselves doing that skill and walking through the whole thing, and then they're sending you the link to be able to view that. And the reason I talk about links is because often on your site, the upload limit may not be big enough for them to just upload a full video. So I often go with links. And I also encourage students to keep kind of their own portfolio someplace, Vimeo, YouTube, whatever works for you. Because then they have a portfolio in a place where they've kept all of their videos. And if they're looking at doing presentations and things, maybe they want to build that portfolio to take with them, and so they always have it, they can go back to it. So that's kind of my take on assignment. I think it's a really versatile activity in Moodle. And Katie, you were talking about your cat. Love that cat. But if other people have other ways that they're using assignment that's kind of unique and outside of the box, what we talked about here, I know everyone would love to hear about it. So feel free to share. All right, cool. Are rubrics available on all recent versions of Moodle? Yes, Angelica. So the way that you would do it is you create your assignment. And then when you're in the assignment, there it would look like this is the assignment. There's a little cog over here. And when you click that, you'll have like the edit settings and things. And there'll be something that says advanced grading. And you can click it, and then you could go to define your rubric. And so you can make the rubric as a site-wide template, or depending on how your site is set up, you could make it potentially as a category-wide template or a site-wide template so you can pull it into other courses. But you can go in there and you can build your rubric. You can put however many rows and columns you need and set your point stuff, and you can put the description of the task in the upper part of the rubric. And you can choose how that displays. So maybe you want students to see the rubric as they should. The whole time that activity is open to them, you always want them to have access to that rubric. The rubric should never be a surprise at the end because it should be guiding them with what the expectations are. And it's a really nice tool. You can use rubric now in Forum also as of 3.8. It doesn't necessarily look as nice on the display as the one in assignment, but I expect that that will change over time, but still equally as effective. We upgraded at the School of Nursing to 3.8 solely to be able to have rubrics for forums, because it helps remove some of that subjectivity in grading of forums. Ginny said that she thinks Ryan recorded his last rubric training here at Casper College, and she's wondering if he has it. She said it was a game changer for her. Rubrics are an extremely useful way to set expectations for students, to very clearly identify the objectives and outcomes we expect them to meet if we build them properly. The problem is that very few people have ever had training on how to build a rubric or how to use a rubric for grading. And so I think that being able to go out and learn more about rubrics is super important. Julie, I don't think there's a way to have rubric columns points be arranged, and there shouldn't be, because it should be.
That's a grading guide, yeah.
Yeah, that's grading guide. If you're using a rubric for the way that a rubric's intended, the points should be very specific. These are the criteria to get these points. These are the criteria to get these points. As long as the span between your two sets of grading criteria isn't huge, then it really shouldn't matter. So if it's APA, I know comes up all the time when it's on a rubric, and it's all or none. So it's like you get all the points if everything's perfect. And then if you have up to this number of errors, you get this. And then up to this many of errors, you get that. It's better to think more broad about things like that, and to break it down into more criterion than to try and lump it all into one. I know sometimes the thing that people get sucked into is, the student gave the background and a solid introduction, and they did this and they did that. And that's all one grading thing, and it shouldn't be. So it should be the student provided, if they had to do a case study and they had to give the history of what was going on, they gave the history, then they evaluated the history, and then they talked about why the history. Those should be really separate things when you're talking about a rubric, because when you lump them together, trying to use a rubric with defined grading boundaries becomes very problematic, because now you're like, well, they did these 3 things, but not this one, but this column says that they didn't, if they didn't do any of them, they lose the points, and so it gets confusing.
So is there a way now to do grading with grading guides in Moodle?
Yeah, grading guides have always been there. We did not use them because as the curriculum committee decided, they wanted rubrics. And so rubric is what you're grading with, rubric's what you should use.
That has since changed. So now.
No, and really,
so now it's the grading guide that we got to try and figure out how to put in now.
Yes and no. So you have to really evaluate why you want to have a range of points and make sure that that's sound for what it is that you're evaluating.
Because the curriculum committee said so. So that is a new one this year.
Yes, well. My dog's barking. Okay, so there's lots of stuff in the chat. David has said that he uses assignments for offline projects too. Performances, physical artifacts, that's a great idea. He unchecks all submission options and sets grading to rubrics. Use description for instructors, resources, links, examples. And then he uses the rubric to grade while students deliver and perform exhibit work. I have used that as well. I believe that we used that at the School of Nursing, where when students were giving like presentations, we popped the rubric into Moodle, and it was a place like it was hidden on the course page, but available so they could see the grade once it came through in the grade book, and we could just evaluate them as they went in the rubric, which was pretty awesome. So that's another way to use assignment. I use assignment to grade things that doesn't necessarily, like we don't necessarily have, the activity doesn't necessarily have a grade associated with it. So I wanted students to complete a wiki, and it was kind of a participation grade. You get a point for this, a point for this, a point for this. I can actually just do that in a rubric. We have used them in the past for grading things like when students come to simulation, there's things that they have to do. They have to come professionally dressed. They have to exhibit certain behaviors in simulation. We just popped an assignment rubric in, and they can be graded right there on that.
And McGuire also said that the forum now has grading option.
Yes,
that
yep.
Makes it really good for feedback and grading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love forum rubric, and I think it's really, really effective in setting the criteria for students about what's expected for a forum, especially because often learners come into a forum and think, oh, I've thrown something in there, I'll get full credit. And I can always point back to the fact that, no, you're not, because this is not about you just posting 250 words of alphabet soup, so no. Right, so that's assignment. Glossary is super cool. So Libby, that's something like we'll have an offline conversation about that whole, like when the grades don't go from the forum over to the grade book. That's kind of like a bug issue that we could talk about separately. Yes, gibberish doesn't equal it. So glossary is super cool. I've seen it used in so many different ways, but traditionally people are like, hey, we're gonna do a glossary and everyone's gonna put their definitions in and then we're all gonna have it. But you could be doing collaborative work that gets students to create and work together. You might be using it, let's say you're talking about, you're taking a literature course and you're talking about 18th century, literary figures, and you want each student to be able to provide like a background, a biography of the different people or their writing style or things that are important, whatever the objective is for that particular content. You could have each student inputting into the glossary. So now they have a collection, and that collection could follow for the class. You might do the same for history. You might do this for theater. You might do it for art. Students could be uploading art. They could be uploading their set design, images of these things into a large collection that's there for everyone to see. Great for the sciences. Maybe you want them to have a collection of equations or principles related to whatever the scientific theory is that you're teaching. It's a great way to get people in there. So while You may or may not be able to link that to grades. Again, you could use an assignment with a rubric to say, this is the criteria for what you're posting here, this is what's expected, and this is how you'll be graded on it. And you can still make it assigned. And Gavin said it's a Swiss Army knife of learning inside Moodle. Absolutely, it can do anything. Last year I attended Troy Patterson's session on glossary, and what he did was, he did the bibliography and introduction, and then on the course page, he has a glossary block that cycles through. So instead of doing an intro forum, people typed in their bio, and every time it came to the course, it cycled through all the different people, and you could see their picture and read their bio. It was so cool. And Melanie said she uses it for techie terms, for IT securities and FAQs, but the students don't build it. Yeah, so if you do it individual, you're building it. If you do it collaborative, they can build it. And I think that that's it's a great way to get people really engaged and to take some ownership in the content that's going out there, and to help them show you what they know about the content. And it forces them to go out and have to find the right information to put it in there, as opposed to, sometimes they can kind of BS their way through a paper or guess it on a quiz. Here, everyone's going to be looking at that. They might want to go out and actually put together something really good. Adam said they do both bios for instructors and staff, as well as an acronym library for folks to learn terms, which in a professional setting, corporate, state, super important to be able to have something where people are learning acronyms. Very difficult. Gavin has posted the link to Michelle Moore's SlideShare in the chat. And I think that Michelle Moore she is just phenomenal. She's brilliant, and her SlideShare is definitely something you'll want to check out when it comes to glossary and all of the different things that you can do with glossary. Glossary itself could be its own 3-hour workshop. Absolutely. And so I really wanted to mention it here, but correct. Glossary does not copy forward. Yep. You can bring a wiki forward. Although there is a way, I think, to bring a glossary forward, right?
Because you can export it and then import it.
Yeah, because if you can use it to do your course FAQ. So if things keep coming up every time you run the course, you can actually preemptively be putting them in this glossary that you then export and import over, or even cherry card over. Then you have those FAQs answered every single time. And so hopefully you're not re-answering the same questions every semester with the stuff. I definitely encourage that. I think it's something that people should do. And
hey, Amy, this is Rick. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Hey, so, and if it's just a configuration setting, then maybe that's it. So one of the challenges we have had with the glossary is when we create it, then it acts as the glossary is supposed to act, i.e. every other place in the course, it adds that link. Is there a way to turn that off?
You can shut off glossary auto linking in the filters. I think it's on the course level, it's filtering.
Thank you.
I have that issue too. It drives me crazy that linking is on by default, either for activities or glossary. So, and so I think the best way to approach that is to look at using a course template and making sure that that's off in the Gavin, it's admins. They decide everything. They totally do. I would do it in the course template and shut it off. Yeah,
it's being helpful.
Yeah, so because the problem is once you turn it off, those links don't always go away. So then you have to go and individually unhyperlink and then fix all the text.
That's what was, even after, when we turned it off after the fact, that's what was happening, is it's like we turned it off. Why is it still linking?
Yeah.
So, okay, thanks.
And as Hart mentioned, you can do it on the course level as, can you do it as a teacher? I've always had admin, right? So I don't know. But you can definitely do it in the admin panel and have your admin shut that off. Definitely something that should be something that you choose to enable versus being enabled by default. Yeah, I saw it in these courses too, and I was like, here we go with the linking. Like I was like, again, now everything looks crazy in here. Like, and it's not intuitive necessarily. Just because I said choice doesn't. I might say choice several more times in the course. And it's not always intuitive about which thing it links to. So yeah, definitely. I think that's a pain point for everyone, honestly. All right. Forum. I love forums. And I know that they're often used to replicate face-to-face classroom discussion. I think my biggest pet peeve with forum, and probably many of you share this, is that people use it as busy work to replace seat time instead of using it as something like that has substance. I think it's a great place to evaluate student critical thinking. And I think your settings when you're using a forum really matter, whether or not it's a Q&A setting where the student has to post first before they can see everyone else's post, which I always turn on if it's something where I want them to go pull, I'm having everyone use the same resource and I want them to just generally like answer a question that's probably going to be fairly standard answer between most of them. You can, yeah, you also have the people who just don't ever add anything and then their students don't add and then everyone's mad that no one uses forums. I always put the first forum post in, even if it's a prompt, like, you know, this is what you're going to do in this forum, I will always post something that says I'll be checking them throughout the week. So they have something from me to show that I'm actually there. They could do video or written responses, which I think are pretty cool. And there's a way to do audio in there as well. Just always remember that accessibility is extremely important when we talk about these things. They can upload documents. So if you want them to share a supporting, maybe if their response to their peer is, hey, go find them a new resource about what they posted, you can share that information. So they can upload documents and things, which is pretty awesome. You can do lots of things with direct ratings, gradings, you know, the rubrics are in there. I really like to use forums to elicit some critical thinking things, as opposed to here's our prompt for the week. Everyone has to do this and everyone has to do that. I want them to get more in depth. I like to give scenarios. I like to ask a lot of questions. One of the key things with forums is that you as the evaluator keep coming back. So don't wait for all of those forms to be submitted before you decide you're going to respond to anybody, because they're not going to keep the conversation going if they don't think there's anyone there. So I usually will set a schedule for myself. If I post it and I give them a week to post, I make sure that at a minimum, I'm in every other day. I know some schools say, oh, you need to respond to at least 5 out of the 25 students in your course. I try to make sure that everyone gets some sort of response each week on something from me. And by logging in every couple days, that's a lot easier. While your response should be meaningful, it doesn't mean that you can't have some canned responses that you kind of copy and paste in there and then personalize a little bit so that they do really know that there's a person there. And Adam talks about when you're in asynchronous learning, forums are difficult for asynchronous learning, especially if there is not a end or start date. So start date or end date. So for instance, not everybody's starting this 4-week asynchronous course on June 1st. I'm going to maybe start it a week after hire, and that's a rolling thing. So forums don't necessarily work well there unless you have someone who's assigned to moderate that all the time. So I think you need to think about the type of asynchronous learning you have. I have a course that's all about teaching presence in the classroom. It's an asynchronous course, but it runs in a 4-week block. So even though you can come in and complete things as you go in that 4 weeks, I can like log in and still respond to people. But if it were something different where it was based off of enrollment was based off of your start date, people would be rolling through and the forum isn't very useful there. So I would need to find something different. So like it does definitely become a staffing issue. Right. So as Gavin pointed out, again, those settings matter. You need to have some concrete start and end dates, some response dates. It needs to be graded if you really want people in there responding. So I think that forums can be very useful. I think that it's really important to avoid those pitfalls of leaving an open-ended forum that you're never in, or just using it to try to replace seat time with busy work. Don't put busy chat in there. The forum needs to be something that's worth their time. Remember that your student or your learner, there needs to be a return on investment for the time that they're spending in your course. And so if something is busy work, they're not going to do it because there's no real return on their investment there. So you always want to make things have substance and have value to your learner. So people are just having conversations there about some other things. So the wiki is another pretty cool tool. I'm sure most people are kind of familiar with wikis. I just want to bring up David's point real quick. David said he pushes for substantive posts over the number of replies and number of posts. I do as well. If I have a student who posts one really great, useful, intelligent response and the minimum was 2, they're still getting the full credit from me because the time they spent to provide something that had a lot of substance is so much more valuable to me than someone who posted the, I agree, I like how you said this. There's no value in that, right? So I definitely play a little bit with my rubrics sometimes. So yes, Wiki is super cool, does require a little bit of skill to set up. You can make them individual or collaborative. I prefer collaborative Wiki for the most part because I think that it can be used for group projects or notes or resources. And again, this is something that's not graded, but it could be if you wanted to set up a grading area in an assignment that had a rubric that gave them the very clear expectations of how the wiki would be used. Very similar to glossary in a lot of ways. I really like to use wiki for group projects where people are working together in a group within the wiki and they're sharing things that way. It does help to promote group projects in an online atmosphere where maybe meeting together isn't an option because maybe the students don't all have a paid Zoom account, and in Zoom maybe you can only have 2 people in there, or students have lots of different living environments, and I think that that's important to remember. Here we have the freedom, no one's going to say anything to you if your camera is off, but for students there's often sometimes that expectation, and so I tend to default to group things being in something like a wiki versus having them work from home in a Zoom session if they, 1, don't have the bandwidth to do so, 2, don't have the home environment that would want to share with people. There may be other situations going on there. So I try to find ways where students don't always have to be on camera to work collaboratively. And I think the wiki is a really great way to do that. And there's like lots of discussion about different things that people use wiki for or other things they use instead of wiki. But if you're somebody who is using wiki, if you would like to share a little bit more with us, we would love to hear it. No? All right, I'm gonna have us take a quick 5-minute break here so people can, like go to the bathroom, get a coffee, get a drink. Melanie has something she wants to add real quick.
The group that I had to create a wiki to teach them how to use the wiki eventually used a wiki to do project development.
Yeah,
so
it's really
like Grails or something.
Yeah, it's effective on the faculty side of things too if you're trying to work on ongoing projects, because I don't know about on your end, but even though we have meeting with lots of meeting minutes, the work that gets done tends to get lost someplace. So in a wiki, there's always right in one spot a place for people to work. So Gavin prefers G Suite, or Office 365. So in a hospital environment, you're not allowed to use Google anything. So it leaves you with 365, and I'll just say that not everyone has the best integration there, so Moodle it is. But all right, let's take a quick 5-minute break. We will come back at 12:30 Mountain Time. Just go grab a drink and take care of whatever you need to do, and we will be back after that. I'm just going to stop my sharing, and actually I'll leave my sharing up, but I'll mute and stop my video.
wait. No.
All right. So it looks like lots of people are just starting to trickle back in. So I will wait a minute. All right, so it is 12:30 my time, 10:30 out there. I think the chat will come with the original recording, Hart. So, and if not, I will go back through and try to pull out all these links to documents and things and pop them into a wiki for us to be able to share within the course so that you all can have it and have access to it. Because I really want people to have all of these things to take away. All right. So I'm going to get started. We're down to, I think, like having an hour left. The whole time change kind of messes me up a little here. So we'll just kind of keep going. I did have a second breakout. I'm not sure that we'll do the second breakout. I tend to always put 2 in and see if there's value in it, but I think that our conversation generates more value than trying to put another breakout session into this particular workshop. Now we're on to workshop. So I have used workshop in the past for my faculty when we were working on an accreditation and we needed to be revising all of the accreditation documents. And we were working in teams, but it was mid-semester. And so everyone is not really in the building to have these meetings really where you shouldn't be revising documents in meetings anyway. So we put the documents into workshop and everyone took their part of the document. So maybe you had standard 6 and there's 3 different parts of standard 6, and maybe I took part 1 and Linda took part 2 and Melanie took part 3. We revised our parts and we were submitting them there and revising and giving each other feedback. When we were done, we took that final document and we had it, and then we submitted it to the people who were putting the whole document together. So that was an example of how I used it for a non-evaluative non-evaluative. I love the term wordsmithing. I'm just laughing, but Hart just put something in about wordsmithing by committee, and the actual term that often gets used, right? And it just makes me roll my eyes. But this was a way that we used workshop in a non-evaluative way, but it kind of shows you the different ways you could use it. Workshop is always collaborative, and you can allow for feedback and submission cycles. So maybe everyone's going to submit during week 1, and I'm going to wait to allow the feedback cycle to open until that submission date is closed. Or maybe it's ongoing, and as people submit, I've already pre-assigned who's going to take that feedback, and it shows up and they can do it. You can allocate the feedback cycles to set people, or you can make it randomized so that it just kind of goes to anyone. So there's lots of ways to work with the submission and feedback. I personally am a fan of allowing a specific span of time for people to submit the initial document and then going into the feedback cycle, and that ends at a specific time. I think that depending on your learners, this prevents any documents from kind of slipping in and not getting enough time to get feedback. And I also think that it really sets that expectation. I'll be honest, when you work with faculty, it is the hardest group to keep a timeline with. And so there's always lots of requests to, can you extend my due date? Can we make this go longer? And I just think that when you set things very concrete like that and explain why, sometimes it can help. And it does allow for very structured feedback. So I can go through and I can have like a grading type guide in there that kind of goes through and helps me to provide feedback. And so my feedback is more than just, think you did a great job. It's extremely structured. And that feedback could be coming from you or from other students. It just sort of depends on how you set your workshop up. And when you automatically allocate submitted work for feedback, then it just goes out to whoever. And so there's less of a concern, like if you were predefining roles where friends are grading friends stuff. So I think you have more opportunity to be able to get some very objective, valuable feedback that the students are giving. And so we often hear the term that teaching is the highest form of learning. This gives your students an opportunity to put what they know out there and to kind of be that teacher for a little while as they're going through and they're evaluating the work of other students with a more critical eye than perhaps they're even looking at their own work with. There's been several posts in the chat. Hart has posted a PDF for the workshop overview. And Melanie said too, I've had to tell people no in the past. I definitely find that when you're working in a professional environment and you're trying to use things like workshop or anything where you're working with colleagues, often imposing the deadlines for things can be difficult, in part because people often will choose the task that's in front of them versus the task that's online because their job is primarily in front of them versus your student who may be doing everything online. Also, we tend to be very cut and dry with students, like this is the due date and you missed it, so you're getting a 0, and really you can't do that with your faculty. Like if they can't really just get a 0 on something, and but you have to be very clear about why the deadlines have to be where they are. Workshop can be very difficult to set up and maneuver. I used it probably, I think we were on Moodle 3.4 at the time, and faculty found it a little bit difficult to get in and figure out how to give the feedback and things like that. However, I know that Ryan is a huge proponent, Ryan at Carroll College is a huge proponent of using Workshop, and he has given workshops on Workshop. Workshop is another one of those tools that actually has so much power and so much versatility that it really could be its own 3-hour session. And I would encourage anyone, if there are any workshop sessions this week, to attend them. There are more features and admin controls and things than any of the, there are more features and controls than we really could go over here as far as what time would allow for. So I definitely think that Workshop is something to look at. It is a little complicated, but very, very worth it once you get through it. There are a lot of really cool documents, even on the Moodle Doc site and out there from places like Amherst College and things, where they post some different tutorials about how to use some of these things with some great examples. So Workshop is a really nice way to not only allow you to see where your students are, but if you're able to read the feedback that's being given, you can see where those students providing feedback are as well. Sometimes their own work may not show that they know what you're hoping to assess, but the feedback they're giving other students shows that they really do have a high level understanding and comprehension of what you've been trying to evaluate and elicit out of them all along. So it gives students a different way to show you what they know and a different way for you to assess that as well. All right, so what about H5P? So I figured that people would want me to mention H5P at some point. I love H5P, but when you're using it for an evaluative purpose, it needs to be a low stakes formative eval, because due to the open source code and the nature of H5P, a student can inspect the page and do whatever sorcery they do there, but you can actually see what the correct answers are supposed to be just by pulling the code from the page. And so that makes it a very insecure way to evaluate. Karen doesn't know what H5P is. Karen, if I have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but H5P is an interactive tool that's completely integrated in Moodle from 3.8, though I didn't find the integration in 3.8 to be super helpful. We stuck with the plugin. It's even further integrated in 3.9, but it offers a way to create interactive content using this free tool. It's based off of like HTML5. Rob has just posted the link. You can get an account for free. You can do like enhanced course presentations. You can do interactive video, which is probably one of my favorite things, where you post a video and you have stop out questions throughout, because if they click the link in Moodle, it says that they've completed it, but I can actually see if they've completed and watched my video now, if they've been completing the questions as they go through. Yeah, developed sort of as a replacement for Flash, which will be, completely gone hopefully soon. You can do a lot of really cool stuff there. And so I know that, and someone did mention, there are lots of H5P sessions this week. Definitely attend one. I learned about H5P for the first time at this conference, and I went back and I was like, you guys are never going to believe this. This is a really amazing tool. We adopted immediately. Melanie just mentioned branching scenarios, which really are incredible. You could do them text-based or with video, and so maybe you have a scenario and the student has to choose what they would do next, and they can keep following through the scenario. Very cool stuff in H5P. But I don't use it, and I don't encourage people to use it as a form of assessment, because students can easily elicit what the answers are supposed to be. I really like H5P for presenting content to students in ways that gives them lots of different variety for seeing that content, and kind of just juices things up a little bit. And someone mentioned it's like SCORM, but without SCORM, which is great. So that's my little H5P. Definitely go to some of those sessions and sign up for the free account on their website, where they have some really great tutorials that you can look at of ways that H5P is being used. So you can see examples of everything. And Adam said they use H5P almost exclusively for learning content. When we had to go online, when I was at the School of Nursing in the spring, we moved all of our what would have been face-to-face high fidelity simulation into branching scenarios, which we had started to roll out when branching scenario became available. We do a lot of H5P there, where people are doing video and course presentation and putting in great activities. It's responsive. Students can do a lot of those activities on their phone, so they can kind of always be working on different things. I like the different like drag and drop, hotspot, the 360 of a room where maybe they have to point out where there's safety issues or whatever the case may be. Lots of really great functionality in there to allow you to really bring your course and your content to the next level for essentially no cost. There's some costs associated, but we use the plugin, so we're not doing that now. This was Breakout 2. I'm going to skip this just because we're low on time, but essentially what we were going to do, we were going to go back to breakout groups. We were going to look at those same scenarios we looked at the first time, and then this time talk about what assessment we would have used to what we would have used to create an assessment for that particular scenario that we chose. But I think that for most of you, you touched on that in your presentation during the first round, and we saw some that hadn't really thought of, like a Venn diagram would have been a great option. And so originally I thought that people would really struggle with how can I effectively create an assessment without being able to use my typical assessment types. But I think everybody kind of gets the point. I think that our conversations here have really shown that we are throwing out lots of ideas for assessment. So I really don't think breakout 2 is necessary. We're going to skip over it and keep going. So we're just going to go back to basics now. When we talk about assessment, everything needs to be outcomes driven, right? That's what an assessment should be. It should be outcomes driven. Otherwise, why are you assessing? And so you have to ask yourself some pretty basic questions no matter what assessment you're choosing. You need to talk about who you're assessing, who's your target audience here, what are you assessing, when are you going to assess that? So is the assessment at a well-timed place? Am I asking students questions on an assessment at a point where they should have already gained all of the knowledge needed to be able to take that assessment? Sometimes we get stuck on a schedule. We're going to have tests in this point, this point, this point, and what if we didn't hit all the content in that time? It might not be the right time to offer that assessment. So we have to keep that in mind always. Where are we going to give the assessment? Is it going to be online with them with us? Is it going to be that they're taking it at home? Because where they take it impacts how they might perform. We definitely know that for places that had to do everything online now, where they maybe had students in the classroom testing, even if it was on their computer, classroom, super controlled environment. Home, not controlled at all. As much as a learner is telling people that they live with, please don't come in, I'm taking this test. They might have children at home. They might live in a noisy apartment. They might have pets. They might have all these different things happening that can affect how they perform on the assessment. So sometimes we have to ask ourselves, is this assessment right for where the student has to complete the assessment? Is a timed test appropriate at 10 o'clock in the morning when half of my students now have children at home, they're homeschooling? They probably not the best time to offer that type of assessment. So do you offer the same assessment at different times, or do you say, I can revise this, create a different assessment type that would work better around that? And as Gavin pointed out, they may have responsibilities slipped after their family, something else going on at home. You know, normally my two sons are in here just constantly needing me during the day. They're not here this week, but it would affect my ability to be able to take a test. I have things I have to do. I have to feed them lunch. I have to break up fights. You know, home, and Ted said, home is often more distracting. Absolutely, especially in the time that we're in now, where almost everyone else is home. So we're not talking about someone who was going to take online classes, and we're not talking about faculty or staff who work from home. We are now bringing work into our home as opposed to being home and that's our office. It's just very different. And so there's a lot more distractions right now at home, I think, than ever. It's very important to remember that. The next is the why. Why are you giving the assessment? Are you giving it because you think that it is going to help you understand where your students are, whether they have developed expertise in the area that you need them to, or are you giving it because you're supposed to give the assessment? And so your why really impacts how effective that assessment is, whether it's quiz or some other type of assessment. And then you have to think about how you're going to give it. You know, what are your instructions going to be? One of the more problematic issues with assessment is students coming back and saying that the directions were ambiguous, and then they really didn't know what was expected of them. And that's, yeah, Ted saying certification versus knowledge check. So these are totally different things, and you have to think about how are you giving these assessments, and are you designing them in the way that elicits the data that you need? And I think we've talked about lots of different options here today. And how to design assessment is like really like a totally different type of workshop that I would love to give at some point, but not really where we are now. However, there are a lot of great resources out there. There is a book by James Popham called Classroom Assessment. If you are working in the K through higher ed industries, it would probably be helpful too if you were doing any face-to-face training. But there are lots of resources out there about how to develop a strong assessment.
The other thing, sorry, this is Ted, is that for me, where I was working in the corporate environment, it was, do we do the assessment because we want them to apply this at work, or do we just want to do a knowledge check? Because a lot of staff that I was familiar with would take something just to pass the assessment and not actually learn to apply it on the job.
Yes. That, just having been on the other side of that where you have to take things, I would just click through to get the assessment to open, and just quickly take it, knowing that I was likely to pass it. Because again, as Adam kind of talked about earlier, in our case, the assessment was designed to be passed, so not necessarily rigorous. But there may have been something in that content that was new that I missed because I just wanted to get to the assessment. So definitely, you have to think about all of those things. I definitely think in corporate and professional ed, it's even more challenging to create an effective assessment that people are actually putting something into, because it's really, they just need to pass the test. They don't need to necessarily do all the lessons. It's not super high stakes necessarily. So yeah, those are great points, Ted. So there's just lots of kind of talk in the chat about that. I love seeing everybody's pets on here, by the way. Pearl is on the couch back here sleeping. So I love it. All right. So when we talk about dynamic assessment, we know that there's lots of different assessment types, and you can choose to assess, you should be able to choose to assess in multiple ways, meaning perhaps you want to offer the opportunity to a student to do a video recorded presentation, or to provide you with a pamphlet that basically has the same information, because perhaps either one could effectively evaluate whether or not the student has met the objectives. But maybe a student is really uncomfortable recording themselves, or doesn't have the means or mechanism to record themselves. So you can assess in multiple ways for even what you might consider a single assessment. And I think that having different assessment and having dynamic assessment, which is assessment that has lots of different ways to express yourself. For instance, when you offer a Moodle quiz, not just offering just multiple choice, but you bring in lots of question types, you're better able to elicit what that learner knows versus what that learner can guess. And so I talk about, professional development, high school, and higher ed have a little bit more flexibility to offer different assessment choices sometimes. K-12 often is very regimented, and this is what you have to do, and you don't always have those different options. But you can design 2 different assessments that evaluate the same objectives, same outcomes, but in different ways. And you could allow student choice. Choose one of these assessments. You're going to either do a quiz or submit a written essay. You're either going to do a presentation or submit a pamphlet. You can allow a student to have choice in which assessment they complete. And as Hart pointed, students love choices. They do, just like we do, right? So some people have said, I'm glad that this conference is online, but no one likes to be told that you can't travel. Like, we like to have the choices, and students often feel trapped in their education when we don't allow any choice at all in how they get to show us what they know. We say, here's what you need to know, and now I'm going to tell you how you need to tell me what you know. That doesn't always work for every student. So giving some choice and assessment can be very critical. And as Melanie said, you can give students permissions and question banks. You can have students write some questions, and it takes the burden off of you. You can revise them a little, but 2, it also helps the students understand how tests are developed and what we're looking for when we're creating questions. And as Emmanuel said, and when you're in a faculty support position, it can be extremely difficult to get instructors to rethink their content assessments. We all know that classic phrase, we've always done it this way, or this is how I've always done it. The most devastating and destructive phrase you will ever hear in any setting, whether it is business, education, or otherwise. And sometimes you can be in a place where you have a little bit more sway or a little bit more influence, but it can be extremely difficult when people are very set in their ways. And so sometimes it's a matter of finding some sort of professional development that you can point them to where people said, this is exactly what I did. Because when people get very stuck in what they're doing, they just need someone to say to them, this is what I did and this is how I did it. Just tell me what to do and how to do it, because they're often not changing out of fear that it's going to be so much work to learn how to do it. But it's a big challenge sometimes. So Gavin said, if in each week, if a student is asked to write one revision question each, when they get feedback from other students, that can be used to make a crowdsourced revision quiz at the end of the module before any high stakes quiz. Great example of a way that you can still use quiz, still involve students, still give some choice, and still find out what your students really know and prepare them before they go in for a high stakes quiz. Great point, Gavin. So secure testing in a COVID world, this is the safe exam browser stuff. I will tell you that I could never do justice to explaining safe exam browser compared to Thomas Corner, who was one of the main parties who's worked on this and who I've heard present on this several times. I believe he did a session maybe at Global Moot about it. But what happens when your testing environment is not secure? Lots of different opinions. I am less of an evangelist for secure testing environments, because if my questions are application and analysis level or above, and I still keep the same time frame, a student is never going to have enough time to Google all my questions, right? Especially if they're self-written and I'm not using a question bank. If I'm really designing a well-written question and perhaps a case scenario, the odds are, even if it's not secure as far as them Googling things, they won't know things. But that does not mean that we're not all on texting each other the information, which is probably the bigger issue, right? Some other things that come up are when you design your own questions or using a question bank is the concern that students are taking pictures of the questions and then selling them on places like Chegg. So while I'm less of an evangelist from the point that I think that, you know, from the not being able to Google every answer, I do get very serious about test security when we start talking about students being able to steal and post those, be paid to post those in question banks, collaborating when we didn't want them to. So then, you know, it kind of brings us to this. So we, as I mentioned, when I was at the School of Nursing, we were using ExamSoft. We contracted when we had to go home with one of their exam monitor products, which was outrageously expensive, cost prohibitively. So there's no way that I can't really see how any school could long-term use that product based on the cost. So we started to talk about, and I really started to look into what other places were doing, because long-term there needs to be other options. And so in talking with Thomas, he talked about the ability to use the safe exam browser, which we talked a little bit about earlier. And that should not be Moodle 3.47, it's 3.7 there under Safe Exam Browser. And being able to turn Zoom on so that you are in a Zoom session, perhaps you push everyone to breakouts and I go in and I moderate the breakout so that I'm only monitoring maybe 6 students and another faculty is monitoring another room of 6 students. Safe Exam Browser is on so that they cannot be Googling things and checking different things on the screen and bringing up notes and whatnot. But I'm Zoom proctoring so I can interject, hey, you know, you've been looking down for too long. You know, you keep looking off to the side. I need you to turn and pan. Now, there are privacy issues, right? Because now we're in a group session. So there's potentially 5 other students that are now watching, having to pan around the room and things like that. But worst case scenario, this was like the lowest cost secure testing that we could come up with. There are others like Proctorio and things like that that can be used where students are individually-ish proctored, like they don't see each other anyway. But so just kind of know that you can combine Safe Exam Browser with an ability to video proctor. So yeah, oh, so they can't see. Okay, that answers that, Gavin. He said it runs in the background. So you see them, they don't see each other, so perfect. Can I comment? So are you talking about like Respondus, Scott?
Well, I've got a split window open, and ours, I don't know which version of Moodle we're using, but I have 2 options. One is that Safe Exam Browser. The other option is full screen pop-up with some JavaScript security option.
Not super secure. It's kind of
Okay.
the difference. Yeah, we've effectively not really made that work well. And
I don't
there's
even know
lots
what
of different stuff.
JavaScript security option, what are they even saying?
I'll be honest, I don't actually know, but I know that there's someone probably in this session who knows what that means. I do know that, so the Safe Exam Browser is actually a very large and comprehensive project. They have their own website. So if you actually go to the Safe Exam Browser website, it will give you a lot of information about what the difference or what you're really getting with that particular exam browser. With it being built into Moodle, I would guess that Moodle core is not going to be developing that particular, the pop-up with the JavaScript stuff. They're not going to develop that any further because they have this in there now. I don't know a lot about that. We did not use Moodle Quiz very much, not for anything really secure anyway at the School of Nursing. So it was something I didn't particularly get into the nitty gritty about and understanding. Gavin's yeah, so there's lots of different questions kind of going on in here in the chat, which is interesting hearing people collaborate about that. So, you know, in a pinch, the lowest cost thing that we could come up with was Zoom proctoring using the Safe Exam Browser. We've had lots of trouble using Respondus and trying to get that to work for students. So I don't know if anybody has been successful with that or not. Or if anyone has anything they want to add, people using Safe. We're the lockdown browser, Rob, was what we had tried to use. It actually was part of a different product that we use, Kaplan Nursing.
Yeah, the JavaScript pop-up just basically removes the navigation and puts it in a single window. It means that the student has to have JavaScript enabled on their end and has to have pop-ups disabled or allow it as it pops up, in addition to the fact that if you have any knowledge that you can alt-tab between windows, it's really easy to get out of. So I would second or third or fourth that is not a secure option.
That's really helpful because they actually, in the version I have, they don't even really talk about the Safe Exam. They just talk about that browser one, which made it sound actually more desirable. So this really helps. Thank you.
Welcome. All right. So now we're just really like at the being able to share point. We have about a half an hour left.
Gavin, that's awesome. You could lock the student into a chair.
And let physical blinkers. Yes, we need all the help we can get. This is a big topic. The security of tests is a big topic coming into fall, especially because around here, what a lot of colleges are doing is students will start a week earlier. They will end everything they need to do by Thanksgiving, go home at Thanksgiving, not come back and finish out the rest of the semester remotely. And I guess that's so that they can kind of, and I actually don't really understand all of it, but the idea behind all of it, but this would allow for people who are doing labs to still have enough labs prior to going home at Thanksgiving. People who do things like clinical, they could wrap clinical by Thanksgiving and send students home. But so the big concern is going into the last tests of the semester and then doing final exams at home. What are all of the options out there? So there's a lot of discussion right now. And I will tell you that a lot of the exam proctoring stuff is an issue. So it's just so cost prohibitive. You're at a time where there's going to be lower revenue. You have lots of people now deciding to take a gap year instead of going to school this year. People who are electing to stay, who would have gone to other schools, electing to go to a local community college for the first year, because why would I pay $40,000 for a year of my gen ed courses when I can go to my community college and pay $3,000 for the year and take my gen ed courses there, and not have to worry about if my campus closes and I need to get back home. Kim said that Carol's going to complete finals before Thanksgiving to avoid all of that. We actually, at the School of Nursing, my understanding is that they have moved all lecture online for the fall, and students will only be meeting in person for adjusted labs and their clinical time. Obviously, whenever you're doing a health science program, you have an added layer of complexity because students have a much higher chance of being in contact with people who have COVID if they're working in a healthcare setting. And so you really don't want them in the classroom. And then also there's the whole contact tracing and trying to move people in and out of buildings in a certain way. But they would, I guess, continue to offer tests online. And actually, I think they talked about being able to bring them in for their exams and they have a conference hall, it's called an auditorium. It's actually not that big, where they're just going to put them in there, try to spread them out. And so they've been going over and like measuring to see if they can do that, but most schools do not have that option. They're a single focus school, so they're the only people who would be in there testing at that time. But that's an anomaly. That's not an option for the majority of people. Yeah, so Scott talked about referring to something as monitoring versus proctoring. If it's just a monitoring tool versus a proctor tool, when we were using Exam Monitor, it is a recorded version. So the software records the student while testing their video and their audio. Then it runs it through AI, and if it's flagged, they have people from like ProctorU or Proctorio review that file, type in exactly the timestamp where this happened, what they viewed, what the concern is, and then you would get the flagged file as the instructor, and then you could go through and see it. And it might say something like, the student had a scrap piece of paper, but that was because you only had two options: all resources or no resources. And our students were allowed to have a pencil, a calculator, and a piece of paper, but there's no option for that. So we always check no resources, because if they had a book and we had checked resources, they wouldn't get flagged for that. The problem was the turnaround time was extraordinarily slow, like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So we had students graduate before we could actually review their last tests for test security and integrity. So, there's lots of concerns out there. People are putting in different things that they've looked at and how they're phrasing that for their students and things. And so you all might want to check that out as well. And so at this time, I usually just open up the floor for people to share any experiences or ask any questions they have about assessment and the assessment options in Moodle. I did put in our course. There are several examples of things. So there's an example assignment with some information in it, an example wiki with just some kind of what we talked about here in there so that you can see it. And kind of just have that as another layer of reinforcement. Yeah, Katie, we would love to see some drag and drop question examples. Yeah, or Drio or whatever you've got going on there. Yeah. No, yeah, we'd love for you to share that. So please do.
Amy, one question. I'm
Sure.
Sorry, Katie. One question that I know we missed is somebody asked if we're going to share this chat inside the course.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture the chat right before the end. I'm going to put it in a Word doc, and then I'm going to take the resource pieces out and put those into a wiki. I won't necessarily share the actual discussion that went on between people. And if you shared a resource that you don't want in that wiki, just let me know. But I think by sharing it here, we probably are all okay with that. But I won't put the full chat in there, just the resources that people have posted.
Thanks, Amy.
Yep.
So as an example course, I put together a quiz that had a whole bunch of question types. So I was going to show you guys a few of those. Let's find the screen to share question type examples. So you should be seeing my screen at this moment. Do you see a picture of the sun and a bunch of squares?
Yeah.
All right. So this is actually a drag and drop image type. So it's images on images. So we don't teach astronomy at our school, and since I have a background in that, I use it so I don't ever give away the answer to something in a training class, just in case. So you can drag and drop, and it snaps to it. So if you get close enough, it's like maybe here, and if you go to the end of it, it'll tell you that it's incomplete if you haven't done all of them, and it'll triangle it for us. You'll notice that it takes a little bit to load. If you use something where you've got images like this, if they're really big images, the question take a long time for a student's internet to load. So be aware when you're looking, especially at images, if there are lots of them. And then this is drag and drop text. So I can click on the Jupyter tab and bring it over here. And you'll notice here, I had it so that if the student was confused, they could label everything as Jupyter. If they really wanted, definitely get one of them correct. One of the things that I was going to ask when I'm done with all of my random examples is if anyone has determined a way to make it so that the select all, if they don't select the correct subset, they get no credit for the question. That's one. So, and then this here, we were talking about the random short answer matching. So this is a random short answer matching. So I had 4 questions that were short answer, and short answer in Moodle is like exact character recognition. So in this case, actually, it's looking like it's matching. It's a matching and not the, there we are, matching questions, matching, edit, ta-da. So it took the short answer and made them into drop downs. So let's see. I don't know if any of the questions related to me, or are we still sharing other? So when you have 4 different screens, I've got one screen over here with my my sharing. Let's go back here to our chat in Zoom.
So this is Rick. I do have a question, Katie.
Yes.
It's broader also, but that is, and Gavin just said, come to my accessibility session. Yeah. But like when you have this drag and drop, is there a quick way, how do you know that it's going to meet accessibility requirements?
Go to the accessibility session, because I can't answer that. Like you can label the images, but then you get into problematic with how you are labeling them without giving the answer away. So I think that so how can you be apples to oranges? So anyway, talk to Gavin.
Okay, it sounds like there is a way to easily do it, and Gavin's going to cover that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, then it is a bad assessment. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thanks.
And I'm trying to think. Let's see. Is there any other question type numerical? These are text on text, drag and drop text on text. And then this is drop down. None of them are close, actually. These are all other types. I didn't do the embedded close just because of the coding, but you can do a lot of fun things with it. So anyway, that's my 3 questions for you all to see what they look like. I'm going to stop sharing.
Very cool. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to share? Questions? Nothing? All right. I'm going to share one more time. Hopefully, let me pop that back up. There we go. Maybe. Hold on. Okay. 1 second here.
If you want, while you're not ready. So I have a question about student-created content in assessment. I've spent, obviously, a long time on working around accessibility, but you can make your assignments and whatever really nicely accessible and so on. But what about when the students upload something? I mean, I remember lecturers talking about students writing something really nicely in Word and then printing it and scanning it as a PDF to upload it, because they didn't know how to get from Word to a PDF a few years ago, but still the principle. So they're uploading inaccessible assignments when the people who could be assessing them may or may not have a disability, may require an accessible format, or external examiners who need to look and verify may have as well. Have you ever required, anyone here ever required someone to actually ensure that the assignment submission was accessible? Because I'll eat my hat if someone has.
I can't answer that for you.
What kind of a hat, Gavin?
Yeah.
It will be a chocolate hat, obviously. Milk chocolate, preferably Swiss.
Yeah, very tough to do.
It'd be outrageous. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody putting their hand up to say that they push students to create good content.
No, I think
depends on how you
I
define
have a hard enough
students.
time convincing my faculty that tables need to be accessible and tables shouldn't be used for layout. They should only be used for data. So if I can't even get my faculty, it's hard to get my students.
Well, it sounds like faculty like that are one lawsuit away from self-realization.
Yeah.
Hey,
I used to teach people how to use Moodle, and anytime they would submit stuff, I would hound them about being accessible, and they hated it. And, that goes back to the I mean thing.
I think we're coming pretty close to the end. Is that right, Ted?
We are.
Okay.
Amy, can I ask one more question? It's Rick.
Yeah, go right ahead, Rick.
So gamification / quiz, is there a way to easily show like the user's first name and to do a game board with, and the top 5 scores on this quiz are these folks? Concept of people retaking a quiz and being able to score higher and that whole concept of a leaderboard.
So the problem with leaderboard in publishing a student name is that it violates lots of privacy rules as far as being able to share grades. Now, you can do an anonymous leaderboard and say whether or not that's a function within any of the gamification plugins is different, but as far as actual student scores on a quiz, you couldn't share that. You could say top score 1 is this.
Yeah, let's suppose, I guess I'm asking the wrong way.
Yeah.
Rather than a quiz that's going to be part of their grade book and their actual grade, but potentially just using a quiz as a learning activity and a chance for them to take the quiz and compete against each other with this quiz and just using like their username or something.
I would actually just say top score 1, top score 2, top score 3, top 5 scores and have no identification, in part because there's a lot of privacy concerns there. And as much as we want to foster competition, when we tie any type of student identification or identifier to a score, inevitably they'll figure out who that is, and that can create substantial animosity, but it also tends to disenfranchise a lot of students from participating. So I would just if you're going to do that to try and make it competitive, I would go straight score, but I don't know that that's a function out of things like, I don't know if that's something you can do in Quiz Venture, which is a plugin. I don't believe that Moodle.
It's in Core. Actually, can I screen share and show that where that is?
Yeah, please. Here, let me stop mine.
Yeah, like a block. Is there a block?
Yeah, there's a block, and actually we improved it. We did a version of this to do group-based category stuff. But let's see. There you go. So you can literally create this it's activity results block.
Okay.
You can select which item you want. So let's say a quiz, and display full name, ID, anonymous. Boom. Percentages, fractions. Yeah. You can also show groups, so you can actually put the groups together and have a group work to sort of a bit of competition at that. But actually, Amy, I want to throw something back at you. For 400 or 500 years, all the universities, in Europe, countries that existed, sorry, I always take that in. But for the last 400 years, universities have put up on poster boards, and in some cases, shouted from the top of staircases, people's names and their grades. I find it fundamentally, conceptually flawed that in the last 10 years, we have suddenly gone, that's all private. So we've lost something
that's from it. That's a whole nother session. So okay.
Yeah, I would disagree. I think that when you look at representation in education and how that affects certain populations to be posting grades, because quite frankly, in the end, when you have your diploma, no one cares if you were a B student or an A student or a C student. They care that you graduated. But I think that when you set up competition like that and you have specific populations of people who have been excluded from or disenfranchised by or marginalized by the education system over time, posting grades publicly can fuel that. I think that's a big concern. I know in the US, it's just we have different laws. Personally, I would never want my grades out there to be posted for people. It's not really anyone's business. But one of the things that I have seen happen is significantly increased amounts of like pretty severe bullying related to when people know what other people's grades are, and bullying to try and find out what those grades are. Yeah, so, and Libby said posting grades also feeds into the idea that a single grade can make or break your career. And I would like to speak to that. That in the history of my career, had a student who performed poorly on a test. One of the first tests in the semester did very badly. That student told another student, someone was harassing them, wanted to know what they got on the test. So when they told student B said, you can't pass. If you look at how the grade breakdown works, you can't pass, you should withdraw. So I have tearful student A now in my office who said, is this true? Because you said it wasn't true. So we had to sit down and go through everything. And for the rest of that course, student A was harassed by student B that they didn't deserve to be there. Look how low their test scores were. So, you know, there are those things. Much like I don't tell people how much money I make, I don't tell people necessarily what my grades are. It's very similar to me. And, you know, and I think it's important to be a devil's advocate. I think you have to look at things from all the different sides. What are the pros and cons of every potential situation in order to choose the one that best fits what's going on with your students or your situation. So I do appreciate that, Gavin.
I'm really glad that we talked about this, because the whole activity results, you know, leaderboard thing that's always been my response. Oh my God, you're telling people's scores?
Right.
That seems like a massive FERPA violation. Bad, which is the American law about data privacy.
Right. So I was a terrible student all through like high school and my first, I don't know, couple years of college until I really like kind of figured out what I wanted to do, and like that college kind of suited me, and now I'm always in college. But if I had known that my grades had been out there like publicly and people could see them, I feel like it would affect my credibility now. If people saw that I literally graduated high school by like 1/10 of a point, I feel like that might affect my credibility long term, despite the fact that I know it was just a matter of not applying myself and things like that. So I think it's important to think about how that can long term affect people. And so, you know, there's lots of great things in the chat here. So
and a lot of times people are jerks, and that's really sad.
Yep.
Yeah, well, don't forget that sometimes a final grade in a degree or actually does impact your career. It will limit you being able to go forward, whether it's in the medical arena or certain businesses.
Absolutely.
If you're not a first, that's what we would say in Europe. If you're not the top, you're not moving forward. So it sometimes does matter. And so I think that in some scenarios, encouraging people to push to that level when that is what's required in that industry is good. But I do take it, because I came from what you'd say is a disadvantaged background. So I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So, all right. So Ted's given me the 9-minute warning. We're going to wrap it up. This slide contains all of the other upcoming sessions that may be related to this or that somehow kind of connect to this. So talking about engagement and impact with the e-learning environment, which, you know, assessment is a part of that. Gavin has an accessibility basics going on tomorrow morning. And I think that everyone should go to this if they can, especially when we talk about building assessments, making sure that we understand those basics. So there's just several things here. Friday at 11, I'll be facilitating and adapting to COVID-related challenges, which is offered by eThink and one of our clients from Simpson College, but they talk about what they did to get their faculty to come in and embrace the tools and be able to move forward. And I know that we've talked about this here a couple times, and I knew we would, getting that faculty buy-in, so that may be a useful thing. So these are some things. I'll be posting this clean copy of this PowerPoint immediately following this. And then just my shameless plug here. If you want to stop by and say hi to me or my team at eThink, you can find me in the virtual vendor booth. I'll be there Thursday from 2 to 3 Mountain Time, which is 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. UTC, I believe. I tried to throw that in there. And you can also find the link by visiting the eThink course page in Moodle. And you can come talk to us about whatever you would like to, and you will score Moot coins if you do stop by and see us. So that is it. I am actually going to stop recording now. Maybe. All right.
That was